Can Baker Mayfield and the Bucs take down Jalen Hurts and the Eagles on Monday Night Football? And which team will be 3-0 when the dust settles? I'll discuss next on this edition of the Bucs Report. Let's go! Well, hello and welcome into this edition of the Bucs Report. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show online. It's bucsreport.com. Today's episode is brought to you by SeatGeek. Take $20 off your first ticket purchase when you use promo code TALKNATS at SeatGeek.com. That's promo code TALKNATS at SeatGeek.com. That includes Bucs tickets. That includes any music, theater, comedy, whatever. Today's episode is also brought to you by Manscaped. Take 20% off plus free shipping when you use promo code at manscaped.com. So in this edition of the Bucs Report, we talk about the Buccaneers as they prepare to take on the Eagles on Monday Night Football. Which team will be 3-0 when the dust settles? We'll talk about that a little bit later. We will talk about Baker Mayfield defying odds. Listen, everyone panned Baker Mayfield before he was playing great as of late. We'll talk about that. And then we'll talk about the games before against the Bears and the Vikings and what is going right and wrong. But in today's episode, we are happy to have Carter Brantley of the Bucs Report. Carter, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Dan. It's a pleasure to be on, and I'm excited to talk some Bucs football. Like you said, really surprising start, so I'm excited to get to it.
I am a bit surprised, and I think that a lot of people, I listen to the Rick Stroud podcast, I listen to a lot of different guys, and not even the insiders, not even the guys that work for the Buccaneers or cover the Buccaneers were this in on them. The Bucs are 2-0, so are the Falcons and Saints, though, in the NFC South. The Eagles, are 2-0 in the NFC East. So taking a look at it, there is a lot at stake. Two teams that have a lot to prove. Jalen Hurts, one heck of a quarterback, and Baker Mayfield kind of defying odds. Where are you so far on the season so far? Is this exceeding your expectations?
Absolutely. I'd say it vastly exceeds my expectations because not only have they won in the first 2 weeks, but they've looked pretty darn good doing it. It's not a stroke of luck. It's not the Vikings managing a weird comeback at the end of the fourth quarter like they were doing last year. It's winning football. You know, they're playing good defense. They're running the ball surprisingly adequately. I wouldn't say well quite yet, but they're at least improving upon their brutal campaign last year in that regard. And, you know, like you said, Baker is balling out. He's taking care of the ball. I hate the word game manager has such a negative connotation because that's the whole job of a quarterback is to manage the game. But he's doing it really, really well right now. And I think that he's just, like you said, proven a bunch of people wrong. So it's going to be really exciting to see how it moves forward.
And it's not really an opinion either. Baker Mayfield threw for 317 yards, marking his first 300-yard game as a Buck, and the 11th of his career. He currently owns a 104.4 pass rating, which ranks 5th in the NFL, and his best mark through 2 games in his career. But taking a look at it, where he has excelled the most is on third downs.
Yep.
I guess one of the areas that he could work on is in the red zone. Weigh in on Baker Mayfield. What is working well for him? It seems like pretty much everything is working well for him, and what needs to get worked on?
Yeah, I mean, there's not a lot of negative things you can say about his game so far. Like you mentioned, the third down success is remarkable. 87% of his passes. I mean, just ridiculous stuff. Passer rating of 132.1. It's just it's unsustainable, unfortunately, because no one's going to have that amount of success on third down for a whole season. But it's still really, really fun to see. But regardless, yeah, I mean, if the red zone thing last week was tough to see, they had to settle for a few field goals, but they managed to turn it around by the end of the game. This Eagles game is going to be huge because, with all due respect to the Bears and the Vikings, he hasn't really played tough defenses, and the offensive line hasn't really had to deal with a monstrous pass rush or anything. I mean, Daniil Hunter, very good player, but he's only one man. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how he performs against the quality teams. But fortunately, the Eagles, 49ers, Bills are really the three best defenses that they're going to face. And other than that, they're going to face some pretty weak defenses. So these past performances may be indicators that that's just how he's going to play against these really crappy defenses. So that's a good thing.
And just taking a look at him in particular, part of Mayfield's success is that he's been extremely good. Like I said, on third down, going 12 for 13 for 141 yards. And this is quite an interesting thing for Baker Mayfield. He came here, he signed a 1-year, $4 million deal that gives him a chance to kind of reestablish himself and his name in the National Football League. There was a lot of, different comments from different people when they were pursuing Baker Mayfield, and then it actually came to fruition. Initially, when Baker came to the Bucs, what was your feeling on it? Were you thinking, there was a better option out there, or were you like, no, I'm all in on this and I like this move?
I think it was a pretty solid fit in regards to just an opportunity to kind of prove himself, and for the Bucs to kind of give a guy a second chance, or maybe in Baker's case, a third chance, I guess. But third time's the charm in this case, hopefully. And I don't know. Initially, I wasn't, jumping up and down like, oh, Baker Mayfield, yeah, yeah, yeah. But I also wasn't like, oh God, the Bucs are going to be awful. Why are they doing this? It was more in the middle, kind of just like, well, we'll see how it works out. I was a little concerned that he wasn't even going to earn the starting position at first, because apparently there were all those reports about training camp, him struggling, throwing interceptions and all that. But obviously he has done a complete 180. He's been fantastic. And yeah, I mean, now I'm really excited and I'm hoping he can keep it up. But yeah, at the time I was kind of mum, just kind of like, well, this is kind of a transition year anyways. Why not just give a guy a chance to kind of prove himself in the NFL again? So yeah, it's turned out really well. But at the time I was kind of, we'll see.
Yeah, and kind of to contrast, the difference is that Baker Mayfield is a mobile quarterback. He will run with the football,
For sure.
sometimes to his detriment. His shoulder was a little bit banged up against the Vikings, so you kind of have that level of worry. Like, I'm glad you're getting the job done. The stiff arm, telling the guy you got to put some weight on. Those were all things that kind of endeared him to Bucs fans and myself. But, that's the one thing I'm worried about. I've seen a lot of quarterbacks' careers cut short, RG3, Andrew Luck, those kind of things, from getting injured. But just taking a look at what he has done so far, pretty impressive. But being that you brought up, there was a bit of a battle early on where it was Kyle Trask and Baker Mayfield. Where were you on that? Were you all in on Mayfield, or did you even think there was a chance that Kyle Trask would get the job?
I always knew all along that Baker wouldn't have signed if he didn't believe he had a chance to earn the starting position, or at least if the Bucs weren't like, "Hey, it's going to be pretty hard for you to lose this starting gig." So I was always kind of sold on him at least making, being the week one guy. I wasn't always sold on him keeping that job. Obviously, at this point, he'd have to screw up quite a bit to lose it, but I wasn't always sold that he would get off to this start. So I figured maybe by week 5 or 6 that there might be discussions about, does Kyle Trask come in? But I was always pretty confident that he would get this week 1 job, and that he would kind of be given the opportunity, hey, it's your job to lose, kind of thing. But I'm just disappointed that the Bucs spent a second-round pick on a guy like Kyle Trask, and they haven't really given him any time or any chances, which, for better or worse, it was his job to earn, so to speak, and he clearly didn't do it. There were years that he wasn't even dressing. He was inactive a lot of the time. So clearly he just was a big, kind of a bust. But it's unfortunate to do that in the Tom Brady era, to spend a second-round pick on a guy that doesn't really play. So I was hoping that he would at least get some kind of chance, but at the same time, I was realistic about Baker Mayfield probably being the starter.
So I want you to look into your crystal ball here and let's take a look at Baker Mayfield for the duration of this season. Is it sustainable? How well do you think he is going to do, or do you think he's going to drop off at some point and people are going to see this is the Baker that we were all telling you about, or do you think that he's going to continue to be riding this wave? I guess for me, a good litmus test is Monday night's game against a formidable opponent in the Eagles. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, obviously injuries play a big factor in that, both for himself and for the rest of the offense. Evans, Godwin, especially Godwin has his own set of injury issues in the past, unfortunately. So if he can stay healthy and if the offense can stay healthy, then I think this type of play is sustainable. I honestly think so. I think that the Bucs can have a very successful season in the terms of their expectations. I'm not saying Super Bowl. I'm not saying any of that, but they'll probably win the NFC South if they continue to play like this, and they'll make the playoffs. They'll be a fun team to watch at the very least. But if injuries happen, this could get kind of ugly. They have kind of a lack of depth at the wide receiver position due to Russell Gage's injury. So if Evans or Godwin goes down, then it's one of the two guys in Trey Palmer, which I love Trey Palmer as a prospect, but unfortunately I don't think that he's quite ready to be a wide receiver too. And with the offensive line, it's kind of the same deal. If Tristan Wirfs goes down, good gracious, that offensive line's in trouble. It's already kind of thin. So, and Baker has his own share of injuries. He had the shoulder thing in Cleveland. So I don't know. Injuries are my only concern with his performance for the rest of the season.
Well, it does seem at least they have a good backup option in Kyle
That's
Trask. I
true.
mean, we haven't seen a lot of real game action. There's been just limited mop-up duty, if you will. All right, so coming up here after the break, we will talk about the Bucs are doing well. How are they doing it? It's not all just Baker Mayfield. We'll discuss next. All right, welcome back into this edition of the Bucs Report. I am so glad you decided to join me in today's episode. We have Carter Brantley of the Bucs Report. So to paint the Buccaneers as they're doing good because Baker Mayfield is doing good, I think would be a bit short-sighted. We take a look at it, all the changes. We have Dave Canales here, who was a quarterbacks coach for the Seahawks, kind of an unproven commodity at this kind of role. Taking a look at it, new offensive coordinator and first-time play caller in Dave Canales, and an offensive line that has 4 or 5 starters, either new or new positions. This offense is very much a work in progress, but the Bucs have been able to work out the kinks while winning to this point. It is quite a thing, I think that there is a chip on the shoulder, not just for Mayfield, but for a lot of the veterans on this team and the young guys. You mentioned Palmer and Tompkins, that this isn't a team that's identity was solely based on Tom Brady. Now that Brady and the 3-ring circus has left town, we're seeing the cream that's left on the team, and it's rising to the top. For you, who is that cream and who is excelling?
Oh man, that's a great question. I don't know. Offensively, it does seem like Chris Godwin has taken a huge step forward, and not that he was ever really bad or anything, but he's kind of returned to that 1,000-yard receiving self. Not that like I said, he was very productive last year too, but it just seems like he's more confident in this offense. They just have a lot more motion going. Play action is now a thing again in Bucs football, which is amazing. And it's really impressive that they're doing all of this under Dave Canales, like you mentioned, the new OC. So the Eagles have a new OC. They have 2 new coordinators, and their offense has struggled a little bit through the air. So obviously, it's just not that simple to bring in a new guy and immediately click. But that's what the Bucs are doing, and there's obviously continuity in the personnel side of things in some aspects. But like you mentioned, a lot of new guys, and Chris Godwin's really just kind of stepped up and done his thing, and it's been really impressive to see.
And one of the big things for me is if you take a look at previous quarterbacks, you take a look at Jameis, and even towards the end for Tom Brady, is the Buccaneers not turning over the football. The Buccaneers did not commit a turnover for the second straight week, and thus have a +5 turnover ratio after 2 games, second in the NFL to Dallas. This marks just the 3rd time in team history the Bucs have made it through the first 2 games of the season without committing a turnover. Those were 81 and 94 teams did the same. So pretty impressive, and I think that an easy answer, and I don't mean to get back to the first segment, but talking about Mayfield, is that it seems like a slam dunk, 1-year deal. We got him on the cheap. Just bring him back. Oh, his agent says not so fast. This isn't the reclamation project that you brought in here. This is Baker Mayfield, a bona fide great quarterback. You're going to need to pay, and there's going to need to be some term here. What are your thoughts on that? Is Baker going to come cheap back to this team, considering how well the Bucs are playing? Because oftentimes the quarterback is the one that takes all the praise. You don't look at Camarda, you don't take a look at McLaughlin hitting the great field goals, all that kind of thing. Talk to me about Baker Mayfield, and is he going to be here in the long term?
It's a complicated question, right? Because you don't necessarily want to pay a guy big bucks based off of 1 year. I think we've seen it happen several times where teams overspend on a quarterback that just had a decent run, and then they give him a bunch of money, and then he turns out to kind of not do as well. Brock Osweiler is a great name to think of. Matt Flynn, Teddy Bridgewater kind of rode being the backup to Drew Brees to a pretty big deal. Nick Foles. There are just a bunch of examples of teams overpaying guys based on a very small sample size, because quarterback is such a volatile and prized position that you need to have a good quarterback in order to be successful in the NFL most of the time. So teams are willing to overspend and try to take a risk. But I don't know, if I'm the Bucs, I kind of try to ease up a little bit, because as good as Baker Mayfield might play, you still have to factor in his injury history, his age. He's closer to 30 than he is to 20. It's tough, because I don't know. It's going to be a tough proposition. If he goes north of 15 million a year, that might be no, we're good. And the Bucs have their own salary cap issues. So there's just a lot of kind of moving parts when it comes to that aspect of the team. But I also wouldn't be surprised if Baker was, hey, I'm happy in Tampa. I liked playing here. Maybe I take a little bit less than I could receive elsewhere because it's a successful system. So I don't know. We'll just have to see. It's a very complicated issue, but an interesting one for sure.
So kind of keeping in the vein here of what is making the Buccaneers successful other than Mayfield. I guess he's a part of a lot of it, but they allowed only 41 rushing yards on 17 carries to the Vikings in week 1. They followed that up with a performance by holding Justin Fields to only 3 yards on 4 carries for the Bears. The real key to the first 2 wins of the season for the Bucs has been their ability to take the ball away on defense. For example, they had 3 takeaways in their week 1 victory against Minnesota. They followed that performance up by intercepting Justin Fields twice. So it is quite a thing. And if we take a look at Shaq Barrett and all that he's had to work against, with the death of his daughter, the Achilles issues, just a real great story of perseverance and inner strength. I know a lot of other people would have probably folded in a similar situation. Just let's even talk about the Achilles issue alone. He's lost a little bit of a jump in his step, but don't tell him that. He played very well. So it is, you're getting performance from not a lot of what I'm going to say, the sexy players, the wide receivers, the running backs, the quarterbacks. It's the guys in the trenches that are getting it done as well. Taking about a look here when Brady was here, even when Brady was here, it was a team full of winners. So it's different for us. Bull said we don't really have any difference in the building. We set our own expectations that we go by. I think the minute you start performing to other people's expectations, you start letting yourself down. And I think there's a hunger. There's also a hunger for Todd Bowles to prove his worth. Let's face it, he is fighting for his job as a head coach in the National Football League. It is, isn't it, about, some of the unsexy players, if you will, the guys working in the trenches. I'm talking about punting. I'm talking about field goals. This is a team all around that's getting it done. It would be too easy to say it's just the quarterback or the wide receiver getting it done.
Yeah, absolutely. And you look at all the best teams in the NFL, and that's the case. The Eagles and the 49ers have especially the 49ers, they have the sexy playmakers, George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, Christian McCaffrey, but they have ridiculous defensive linemen, an amazing defense. And the Eagles are the same way. They've got Jalen Hurts and AJ Brown, but they've got the best offensive line in football, and they have one of the best front sevens in football. So it's just, it's easy to focus on, like you said, the kind of the sexy players that make all the headlines, but it's really the trenches guys that make the difference. If you win the line of scrimmage, then those skill position guys can do their thing, So yeah, it's really impressive to see the Bucs do that. Obviously Vita Vea, a huge part of that. And like you mentioned, Shaq Barrett and JTS, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, he had a great game last week. And, if he can keep that up, then man, this Bucs defense is going to be really, really scary because, Shaq, like you said, he's lost a step, but like you said, don't tell him that. So him and JTS could kind of form that, JPP Shaq Barrett duo from the Super Bowl run, which would be really fun to see. And it's really the battle of the trenches, the guys that you don't necessarily hear about all the time. Those are the guys getting it done for the good teams, and they're doing that for the Bucs.
Yeah, one of the things I was concerned about was Jensen, about him not being good to go. And, he gambled. He went in on the stem cell procedure he had done instead of the knee operation, and he lost. And now he might not ever play another game of football again. I mean, I guess that's a little bit ahead of myself, but that could potentially be the case. But it does seem that isn't a position of concern anymore. It seems like this team is just chugging along on all cylinders. But taking a look at what worked against the Bears, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defeated the Bears 27-17 on Sunday, but it took 2 interceptions in the last 2:03 of regulation to put away the game. And then, like I talked about, Shaq Barrett intercepted an attempted screen pass. And then talking about safety Christian Izien grabbed a pass deflected by safety Antoine Winfield Jr. This is what I'm talking about, production and every guy stepping up. I think that, again, to kind of reiterate, I think that this is a team that wants to prove that we are not a team that was identified by our former quarterback. We can stand on our own. So just a real great performance. What are some of the things that stood out for you about the Bucs against the Bears?
I think the stark contrast in play calling was probably the biggest difference, because the Bears just seemed really uncreative offensively. It was hard to watch at some points, because obviously the Bucs defense played really, really well, but good gracious, because that Shaq Barrett interception, I mean, they talked about it after the game. They ran the same play 3 times in a row. So Shaq Barrett knew exactly where it was going. He said, yeah, it was easy. Levante David talked about it. And just the lack of creativity. And it's not even necessarily like the Bucs are running, this Kyle Shanahan, millions of motions, everyone moving around all the time type of offense. But good Lord, compared to the Bears, it kind of looked like it. So I think that's the biggest thing for me that I took away from that game, is that the Bears offensive play calling is really bad. But also the Bucs offensive play calling is kind of fun. They've got a lot of bootleg actions that they run with Baker since he's mobile. They're actually running the ball again, which is fantastic. They seem to be incorporating, like you mentioned earlier, Tompkins into a lot of kind of gadget plays, which is really fun, because I think he's been, he hasn't been utilized at all other than just a punt returner. So that was really fun to see as well, kind of putting him in motion and getting him on these kind of like screen actions or what have you. So yeah, that was kind of the biggest takeaway from that Bucs Bears game.
So just continuing to talk about Shaq Barrett here, in addition to his first career touchdown, Barrett also claimed the first of the Bucs half-dozen sacks in the second quarter, running his total as a Buccaneers to 41.5 sacks, the 5th most in team history.
Hey.
Despite missing the last 9 games of 2022 season due to an Achilles tendon tear, Barrett ranks 8th in the NFL in sacks since he signed with the Bucs in 2019. So that's what I'm talking about. A guy that has had a lot of adversity. He has found a way to persevere. And I'm glad that he was able to come back after that injury. I mean, if you take a look at Rodgers, for example, another Achilles issue. I know some guys that cover hockey as well. They've had that issue. So sometimes that can be career ending, or sometimes it limits their mobility, but it does not appear to be the case in Shaq Barrett. All right. So coming up here after the break, we will talk about the Bucs versus the Eagles. Who is going to be 3-0 when the dust settles? We'll tell us next. News. Manscaped now sells beard products. That's right. They are once again revolutionizing men's grooming with a brand new Beard Hedger Pro Kit. From a beard trim to a fresh shave, the technology behind the Beard Hedger Pro Kit allows you to shape your signature beard look. Now you can finally use Manscaped products to make your drapes match your carpet by going to manscaped.com and using promo code MINUTECAST for 20% off and free shipping. It's time to tame your mane. No one likes a weird beard, so say goodbye to all the stubble trouble with Manscaped's Pro Beard Kit. It all starts with the Beard Hedger. This thing is a juggernaut of fixing faces. First off, this cordless trimmer has a rotary wheel that gives you 20 hair cutting lengths, all with one guard. So no more messy drawers full of extra add-ons. That's right, face grooming doesn't need to be hard. Get 20 different beard lengths in just one guard. Plus, it's waterproof so you can shave in the shower to avoid all the hair in the sink. Get 20% off and free shipping with promo code MINUTECAST at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com, and use promo code MINUTECAST. Manscaped Beard Hedger, 1 stroke, 1 guard, 20 lengths. All right, welcome back into this edition of the Bucs Report. We're happy to have Carter Brantley of the Bucs Report in this episode. So let's talk about the Bucs versus the Eagles on Monday Night Football. It's going to be tough not having Bucs football on Sunday. The season just started, for God's sake. But taking a look at it here, the Bucs and Eagles have only played 5 times since 2013 season, with the Bucs going 2-3 against the Eagles in those games. The matchup will mark the 3rd season in a row that these two teams play against each other. So, two great quarterbacks, Hurts versus Mayfield. Weigh in. How are the Bucs going to do? Are they going to win this, or is this going to be their first loss of the season?
I'm afraid that I think it's going to be their first loss. I hate to be a Debbie Downer. The Eagles are my Super Bowl pick. I think they're going to win it all. They're just uber talented. Jalen Hurts, one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL right now, and he's just surrounded by talent. It's going to be a tough battle. And I think it's going to be the first game where the Bucs really feel tested and they have to play like a really, really good opponent. But with all that being said, it is going to be a good game. I don't think it's going to be a blowout by any stretch of the imagination. And I could very well be wrong. I mean, I'm wrong all the time. But yeah, I mean, the Eagles are a really, really good team. But, I've talked to some Eagles fans, and a lot of them are concerned that this is kind of a trap game, so to speak. They've kind of eked out victories in the first 2 weeks, so they look a little shaky. Last week, the Vikings were kind of able to get Hurts a little uncomfortable by sending a lot of blitz packages at them. We all know how Todd Bowles kind of loves to mix it up and blitz a lot. So it's going to be interesting. I'm going to be really intrigued by this matchup. Definitely tuning in, obviously. But unfortunately, I just don't think the Bucs have it to pull this one out.
So just taking a look at it, how can they beat the Eagles is shutting down their run game. No team in the NFL has more first downs from run attempts than the Eagles. Their offense goes through the running game, and that will be Todd Bowles and the Buccaneers defense focus on Monday night. So that's the big thing. I think that they have enough time to pre-scout, to prepare. I know that we're only going to be 3 games in here, but there's enough footage, I got to think, that they can look at. And it starts with Jalen Hurts. It starts with Jalen Hurts, who led all quarterbacks in rushing yards and touchdowns last season. And him being such a threat in his running game opens up the rest of the offense. If you can slow down the QB, then you can disrupt the Eagles' offense. That is going to be paramount. Do you think the Bucs are up for that challenge?
I do. If I were to say, any situation where the Bucs could beat the Eagles, this would be the game to do it. If the Eagles have gotten off to this kind of weird, slow start, Hurts has already turned the ball over more in this, 2-week span than he had in very long stretches of the year last season. So, if the Bucs can jump out ahead and force the Eagles to kind of have to throw the ball a little more, they can't just, because they were just dominating teams last year and they would just settle in, run the football a lot. And just be able to do that. So if any team is going to do it, I think the Bucs are the team to do it because they can stop the run pretty well. They did a great job holding Justin Fields in the pocket and limiting him in the run game. So I think the Bucs are up for the challenge. It's going to be tough to see if they can keep up with that Eagles pass rush. Honestly, I'm a little concerned with that.
And taking a look at the Bucs rushing defense has been some of the best in the league through 2 weeks. If you look at the underlying metrics, they are on top defense overall, but their strength is in stopping the running game. Taking a look at what they need to do is continue to win on 3rd down. If they can continue to convert on that and make it a first down, that would be a big thing. It seems that Baker Mayfield has been able to do that thus far. Do you see him having that continued success, or do you think the Eagles are going to be prepared for what Mayfield throws their way?
I think they'll be a bit more prepared than the last couple of weeks. The Vikings and the Bears just don't have the personnel that the Eagles do on the defensive side of the ball. They just lack kind of the thumpers. The Eagles have just this ridiculous pass rush rotation where they can, have, Fletcher Cox and then Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter in at any point. And then they've got, Hassan Reddick on the edge and Josh Sweat. And then they've got that 1st-round pick out of Georgia, Nolan Smith. So it's just an insane amount of talent in that defensive line, and the Bucs offensive line can be a bit leaky. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. I don't know. We're just going to have to see. It's going to be a really great game though, for sure.
So taking a look at the Bucs, all things considered, there's not a lot that needs fixing, but areas that need improving, there are still plenty of areas for improvement. The Bucs rank 30th out of 32 teams in red zone efficiency, which we talked about off the top. Getting touchdowns, just one of every 3 trips inside the 20, ahead of only the Jets and the Texans. Yikes.
Yeah.
They've run the ball well by volume, eating up clock and keeping their defense off the field, but are averaging 2.88 yards per carry, ranking 29th. How do they fix that issue? How do they turn that around? What are your thoughts?
I'm not sure if there's necessarily I think the numbers can be a bit not conceiving, a little bit misleading, so to speak, in this case, because in week 1 they didn't exactly run the football very well, but they also only had one play that lost yardage running the ball, and I think that's going to be huge. Even if they don't necessarily get the max production, they're not putting up a bunch of 20-yard rushes. They don't have to be the Eagles running the football, but last week they ran the ball pretty well, so I don't know if there's necessarily a solution or an easy fix for this. Because like I said, I don't necessarily think of it as being a huge problem. But it is certainly disappointing to see them continue to kind of rank near the bottom of the league in yards per carry, because they were last year. So it's just, it's kind of tough to continue to see that. But like I said, I don't know that there's an easy fix for it. There have been a lot of discussions about maybe bringing in another back, especially with Chase Edmonds going down. I don't know that that's going to be something that comes to fruition, but that's maybe something interesting to explore, just to ease Rashad White, because he's going to have to be playing a lot now, especially. So maybe bringing someone in to kind of ease that burden on him, but we'll see how it goes moving forward.
So I heard you did say that you think the Eagles are going to win this game. So now the question is how do you think the Bucs finish in the NFC South? Do you think that they win it? Do you think, where are they in the NFC South at the end of the season?
It's still, it's obviously only week 3, but if I had to pick right now, gun to my head, I'd probably say second. I don't know that they finish first. There are a few games that are kind of, the division matchups are always tough. And then, they play the Bills and the 49ers in addition to the Eagles, obviously, and the Jaguars. Those are probably the 4 really hardest teams that they have to play for the rest of the year. But they do have a relatively easy schedule, so I don't think they're going to be cellar dwellers, especially with the Panthers playing as poorly as they have, and Bryce Young's going to be out for a while. So, those Panthers games should be easy victories. I just think that the Saints also have a really easy schedule. Like, you take a look at the Saints and who they get to play this season. I don't think they play a top 15 quarterback in the season. So they could have a really good record and not be a very good team. They just kind of got the luck of the draw with the schedule. So I don't know. My prediction is probably second at this point.
Yeah, and I think that's a pretty safe bet to say. I want to be drinking the creamsicle Kool-Aid and thinking they're going to win the NFC South, and they might. I'm not saying that they're not going to. I just, again, there's not enough video footage. There's not enough games. I'm going to say that this Eagles game is going to really sway my opinion. If they can pick up a dub, if they can find a way to beat the Eagles, maybe. I'm going to say maybe. That's where I weigh on this. Absolutely. Listen, Carter, I want to thank you for joining us on this edition of the Bucs Report. Why don't you tell everyone where we can find your work?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, Bucs Report is where you can find me with Carter's Corner, but also on Creative Loafing, I do a lot of great work, or I do a lot of good work for them. They're great. And then RBLR Podcast, we host a Bucs show. You can definitely check me out there as well. And CT Brantley 12, the Twitter handle, I put it on the screen there. You can find me there as well if you're interested. But I really appreciate you having me on, Dan. This was a blast. It's always a good time with you, my man. So I really appreciate it.
All right. And thank you for joining us. And thank you all for joining us on this edition of the Bucs Report.